You are a disgrace to this uniform, Lieutenant Commander. An absolute stain on the legacy of this Navy, the words, amplified by the flight deck's powerful address system, cracked like a whip over the assembled crowd of 5,000 sailors. The wind, whipping across the deck of the USS Gerald R. Ford, seemed to hold its breath. Rear Admiral Marcus Thorne, his face a florid mask of rage, stood inches from the officer, his voice dripping with a venom that was both personal and performative. The crowd, a sea of dress whites shimmering under the unforgiving Virginia sun, shifted uncomfortably. A few nervous snickers rippled through the junior ranks, quickly suppressed. But the silence that followed was heavier, more profound than the laughter. The woman at the center of this storm, Lieutenant Commander Anya Sharma, did not react. She stood at a perfect parade ground attention, her gaze fixed on a point somewhere over the Admiral's shoulder, a point in the vast, indifferent blue of the Atlantic horizon. She was of average height, with a build that seemed slight, almost fragile, inside the crisp architecture of her uniform. There was nothing about her that screamed warrior, no jagged scars, no cauliflower ears, no swaggering posture. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, so tight it seemed to carve her features into a mask of serene neutrality. She was, to the casual observer, and certainly to the enraged Admiral, utterly and completely unremarkable. But Fleet Admiral James Callahan, watching from the elevated VIP platform, saw something else entirely. He saw the stance. It wasn't the rigid, fearful posture of a junior officer being dressed down. It was the rooted, placid stillness of a mountain. He saw the way her hands, held loosely at her sides, were perfectly relaxed, not clenched into fists of anger or fear. He saw the cadence of her breathing, a slow, metronomic rhythm that was the absolute antithesis of panic. It was the calm of a hurricane's eye, a terrifying and profound peace that spoke of a power held in absolute reserve. Callahan had seen that calm before, in the eyes of men who had walked through hell and returned with its shadows still clinging to them. He leaned forward slightly, a knot of cold dread and dawning recognition tightening in his gut. If you believe that true strength is found not in the volume of the voice, but in the discipline of the soul, type competence in the comments below. The source of Admiral Thorne's fury was, in his mind, a profound breach of military decorum. During the opening remarks of the fleet change of command ceremony, a gust of wind had caught the ceremonial flag of the outgoing command, threatening to send it tumbling from its pole. While others gasped or fumbled, Lieutenant Commander Sharma had simply taken one fluid step, caught the weighted tassel with an almost casual grace, and secured it without breaking the solemnity of the moment. To the assembled sailors, it was a minor, well-handled incident. But to Admiral Thorne, a man whose entire career was built on the rigid scaffolding of perception and protocol, it was an unforgivable sin. She had moved. She had acted without being ordered. She, a junior officer he didn't even recognize, had inserted herself into a sacred ritual. His insecurity, always simmering beneath a veneer of blustering authority, had boiled over. "Who in the hell do you think you are?" he roared, his voice now a raw, grating thing that echoed unnaturally in the open air. "This stage, this ceremony, is for warriors. It is for the men and women who have bled for this fleet, who have upheld its traditions with their very lives. It is not a playground for some diversity hire, some pencil pusher from a desk in Norfolk who thinks she can make a name for herself by grandstanding." The insult was as specific as it was baseless, designed to inflict maximum public humiliation. He was weaponizing her unassuming appearance against her, painting her as an outsider, a paper pusher who didn't belong on the hallowed deck of a nuclear aircraft carrier. The 5,000 sailors stood frozen, a captive audience to a brutal character assassination. They were trapped between the rigid demands of military discipline, which forbade them from interfering, and the basic human decency that screamed at them that this was wrong. Sharma's face remained a placid lake. Her expression did not flicker. Her gaze did not waver. The Admiral, incensed by her lack of a cowering response, took it as insolence. He saw her calm not as discipline, but as defiance. "You look at me when I'm speaking to you, Lieutenant Commander," he bellowed, stepping even closer, his shadow falling over her completely. And then he did the unthinkable. He raised his hand, not in a fist, but with an open palm, and struck her across the face. It wasn't a punch meant to injure. It was a slap meant to degrade. The sound, a sharp, ugly crack, was swallowed by the vastness of the flight deck, yet seemed to reverberate in the skull of every person present. A collective, horrified gasp rippled through the ranks. In the history of the modern Navy, this was a line that was never, ever crossed. For a moment, absolute, deafening silence descended. Then, slowly, deliberately, Anya Sharma turned her head back to its original position, her eyes once again finding that distant point on the horizon. A single, thin trickle of blood ran from the corner of her lip, a stark crimson line against the pale canvas of her skin. She did not wipe it away. She simply stood, a living statue of incomprehensible composure, her silence a more powerful rebuke than any words could ever be. It was in that moment of stunned, electric silence that the second anomaly appeared. It was a small, dark shape against the crystalline blue sky, moving with an unnatural, buzzing speed. At first, it was dismissed as a gull or a piece of debris caught in the wind. But it grew steadily larger, resolving into the distinct four-rotor silhouette of a commercial-grade quadcopter drone. It was flying erratically, zipping towards the carrier not with the smooth, programmed path of an authorized media drone, but with the jerky, unpredictable movement of something uninvited and potentially hostile. A murmur of alarm spread through the crowd. The security detail, positioned around the periphery of the flight deck, snapped to attention, their eyes scanning the sky, their voices barking into their radios. Unidentified aerial vehicle, bearing 090, fast approach. The atmosphere of ceremonial pomp shattered, replaced by the jagged edge of a real-world threat. Panic, that insidious contagion, began to flicker at the edges of the formation. Admiral Thorne, his face still contorted with rage, was momentarily confused, his personal drama usurped by a larger crisis. He spun around, shouting for answers, his authority suddenly seeming hollow and ineffective in the face of an actual danger. His outburst had broken the ceremony's discipline, and now this drone was breaking its security. The carefully constructed illusion of order was collapsing. But while chaos began to bloom around her, Lieutenant Commander Sharma remained an island of impossible calm. The world did not speed up for her. It slowed down. The shouting voices, the crackle of radios, the frantic movements of the security team, it all faded into a muted, peripheral hum. Her mind, a machine honed by years of unimaginable pressure, was processing data with cold, machine-like efficiency. Her eyes, which had seemed so placid and distant, were now alive with a terrifying focus. She tracked the drone's trajectory, her brain instantly calculating its velocity, its potential payload capacity based on its size and motor strain, and its most likely target, the cluster of high-ranking officials on the VIP platform, including the fleet admiral himself. She didn't look at the drone as a threat. She looked at it as a problem with a set of solvable variables. Her body, which had appeared so slight, now seemed coiled with a latent energy, every muscle fiber aligned and ready. While others saw a crisis, she saw a tactical equation laid out against the sky. Her stillness was no longer passive, it was predatory. The Navy security team, trained for shipboard threats like fires or intruders, was reacting by the book, which was precisely the wrong way. They raised their rifles, M4S not meant for engaging a small, agile aerial target. Firing into the sky on a crowded flight deck was a catastrophic risk, with the potential for ricochets or stray rounds hitting personnel or, worse, sensitive equipment on the carrier's island superstructure. Their shouts were loud, but their actions were hesitant, paralyzed by a threat matrix for which they had no immediate, effective protocol. Admiral Thorne, trying to reassert his dominance, began barking contradictory orders, adding to the confusion. Shoot it down. No, hold your fire. Establish a perimeter. His commands were a reflection of his own inner turmoil, a desperate attempt to project control over a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond him. It was in this critical window of indecision, this vacuum of competent leadership, that Anya Sharma acted. She didn't shout. She didn't draw a weapon. Her movements were a study in minimalist efficiency. She took 3 precise, gliding steps to her right and 1 step forward. It seemed like a casual shift in position, but to the trained eye of Fleet Admiral Callahan, it was a tactical repositioning of staggering genius. She had placed her body perfectly on the drone's final approach vector to the VIP platform, making herself the last line of defense. She was now the shield. Simultaneously, her right hand moved in a fluid, economical arc to a small, nondescript pouch on her belt. Her fingers unclipped the magnetic clasp with an audible click that seemed, in the sudden clarity of the moment, as loud as a gunshot. She didn't draw what was inside, but her hand rested on it, ready. Her entire posture had shifted from parade rest to a low-profile combat stance, a subtle realignment of her center of gravity that prepared her for explosive action. She had become, in the space of 2 seconds and 4 steps, the most dangerous thing on that flight deck. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes no longer looking at the drone itself, but just past it, anticipating its next move. She was not just reacting, she was thinking ahead of it. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the drone wavered. It listed violently to one side, its rotors whining at a pained, high pitch. It tumbled from the sky, not from being shot, but as if its operator, perhaps watching through a camera and seeing this unassuming woman transform into a human anti-aircraft weapon, had panicked and lost control. It crashed harmlessly onto the deck, plating 50 yards away, a broken toy of plastic and wire. The immediate threat was over, but the demonstration was complete. In the aftermath, as the security team cautiously approached the downed drone, a new, more profound silence fell. The sailors were no longer looking at the fallen machine. They were all looking at Lieutenant Commander Sharma. They didn't understand what they had just seen, not fully, but they understood the difference between panicked shouting and silent, absolute competence. They had just witnessed a masterclass in crisis management, and it had come from the very person who had been publicly humiliated just moments before. Admiral Thorne stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape, the arrogant fury on his face replaced by a mask of stunned, utter disbelief. He had called her a disgrace, and she had just proven herself to be the only person truly in control. The irony was so thick, it was suffocating. Fleet Admiral James Callahan had seen enough. The quiet dignity under fire, the cold professionalism in the face of public humiliation, and the sublime, almost supernatural tactical awareness. It all clicked into place, connecting to a ghost story, a rumor he'd heard whispered in the classified confines of the Pentagon. He moved with a purpose that belied his age, descending the steps from the VIP platform, his presence parting the sea of sailors like a battleship cutting through waves. The 4 stars on his collar seemed to burn with a cold fire. He walked past the fumbling security team, past the wreckage of the drone, and past the utterly defeated Admiral Thorne, whom he did not even grant a glance. His eyes were fixed solely on Lieutenant Commander Sharma. He stopped directly in front of her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes holding a universe of respect. The trickle of blood on her lip had dried now, a tiny, dark flag of her ordeal. For a long moment, the 2 officers stood in silence, the highest-ranking man in the Navy and the woman who had just been struck in front of his entire fleet. The power dynamic on the flight deck had been irrevocably inverted. Lieutenant Commander, Callahan's voice was low, but it carried the effortless authority of a lifetime of command. It was calm, respectful, and completely devoid of the condescension she had just endured. "What is your full name and designation?" He was not asking for information. He was starting a formal record. He was laying the foundation for what was to come. "Anya Sharma, Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy," she replied. Her voice was steady, clear, and betrayed no hint of the trauma or triumph of the preceding minutes. It was the voice of a professional delivering a report. It was the first time she had spoken, and the simple, declarative sentence seemed to hold more weight than all of Admiral Thorne's bellowed insults. Callahan held her gaze for another second, then turned to his aide, a young captain who had followed him down from the platform. "Captain, give me Lieutenant Commander Sharma's service jacket. I want the full file, unredacted, projected to my tablet." Now, the word unredacted hung in the air, charged with meaning. Every officer present knew what it implied. access to the deepest, most classified levels of a service record, a level reserved for operations and units that didn't officially exist. The captain, wide-eyed, fumbled with his own secure data pad, his fingers flying across the screen as he accessed the Navy's highest-level personnel database. A moment later, he handed his tablet to the fleet admiral. The silence on the deck was now absolute. 5,000 sailors, from the rawest recruit to the most senior captain, stood motionless, waiting for the resolution to a drama they could barely comprehend. They were about to learn who Anya Sharma really was. Admiral Callahan took the tablet, his eyes scanning the screen. His expression, already grim, tightened into a mask of profound awe and deep institutional shame. He knew the ghost story was real, and she was standing right in front of him. He turned, not to address Sharma, but to face the entire assembled fleet. He keyed his own lapel mic, and his voice, now amplified, boomed across the deck with the weight of history. "Attention on deck," he commanded, and 5,000 pairs of heels clicked together as one. He then began to read from the tablet, his voice a slow, deliberate cadence that hammered home the significance of every word. Name, Anya Sharma. Rank, Lieutenant Commander. Commissioned through Officer Candidate School. Basic Underwater Demolition / SEAL Training, Class 234. Graduated Honor Man. A wave of shock rippled through the crowd. Honor Man, the top graduate of the most grueling military training in the world. Thorn, standing off to the side, turned a shade of pale white that was terrifying to behold. Callahan continued, his voice rising in intensity. Postgraduate qualifications. Naval Special Warfare Sniper School. Advanced Freefall Parachuting. Lead Breacher and Explosives Expert. Tier 1 language qualification in Pashto, Dari, and Russian. The list went on, a litany of impossible achievements. Unit assignment. Naval Special Warfare Development Group. He paused, letting the name sink in. DevGru. The public knew it by another name. SEAL Team 6. The most elite, secretive, and lethal special operations unit in the American arsenal. They were the ghosts, the quiet professionals sent to the darkest corners of the world to solve problems no one else could. The pencil pusher from Norfolk. The diversity hire. The woman who was a disgrace to the uniform. The irony was a physical blow. Callahan wasn't finished. Deployments. 16 forward deployments to hostile fire zones. Classification. Top secret / code word. He looked up from the tablet, his eyes sweeping over the stunned faces of his sailors. Medals and commendations. 4 Bronze Stars with Valor. The Silver Star. The Distinguished Service Cross. He paused again, his voice dropping to an almost reverent whisper. And the Navy Cross, awarded for actions during Operation Night Serpent. Details sealed by presidential order, the Navy Cross. Second only to the Medal of Honor. An award for heroism so profound it was almost mythical. He lowered the tablet, the screen glowing with a record of service so extraordinary it bordered on unbelievable. He then turned back to Sharma, who had remained at perfect attention throughout the entire recital. He looked at the dried blood on her lip, at the unwavering strength in her eyes, and he executed the single most profound gesture of respect one naval officer can give another. He raised his hand to his brow in a slow, perfect, formal salute. Lieutenant Commander Sharma, his voice cracked with emotion. On behalf of the United States Navy, I apologize. Your service, your sacrifice, it honors every single one of us. You are the standard by which we should all be measured. For a beat, there was only the sound of the wind. Then, as if triggered by a single thought, 5,000 sailors, from the lowest seaman to the highest captain, raised their hands in salute. The sound of it, a great, unified rustle of fabric and purpose, was a thunderous roar of vindication. Admiral Thorn, forgotten and alone, simply crumpled, his legs giving way as the full, crushing weight of his catastrophic misjudgment finally broke him. The story of what happened on the flight deck of the USS Gerald R. Ford did not spread through official channels. It moved faster, transmitted through the unofficial, lightning-quick network of sailors' gossip. It flashed from phone to phone in hurried text messages, was whispered in hushed, awed tones in the mess decks, and debated in the berthing compartments late into the night. By the time the sun set, Every sailor in the Atlantic Fleet knew the story. They called it Thorn's Folly, or, more respectfully, the commander's stand, the legend of Anya Sharma, the quiet lieutenant commander who was secretly a ghost of Devguru, was born. The narrative took on mythic proportions. Details were exaggerated, as they always are. Some claimed she had disabled the drone with a concentrated stare. Others swore she had calculated the drone's failure point just by listening to the pitch of its motors. But the core of the story, the truth of it, remained intact. A loud, arrogant admiral had publicly humiliated a quiet, unassuming officer, only to be undone by the silent, undeniable weight of her competence and heroism. The incident became a parable, a cautionary tale about the fatal flaw of judging by appearances. It was a story about how the most unassuming sheath can hide the sharpest sword. The name Sharma became a new kind of shorthand in the fleet. To pull a Sharma meant to remain calm and professional under extreme provocation. The phrase "check the jacket," a reminder to look past the surface before making a judgment, entered the naval lexicon. The ripple effects were immediate and profound. Admiral Thorn was formally relieved of his command before the ceremony had even officially concluded. He was placed under investigation by the Judge Advocate General's Corps, facing charges of conduct unbecoming an officer and assault. His career, once a shining pillar of naval ambition, had been reduced to ash and rubble in the space of 10 minutes. He had not been defeated by an enemy fleet or a political maneuver. He had been dismantled by his own prejudice and the quiet strength of a single officer he had tragically underestimated. The official Navy response was swift and decisive. Fleet Admiral Callahan, understanding the monumental importance of the moment, ordered a fleet-wide stand-down for the following day. Every ship, every shore command, would cease normal operations for 4 hours. The purpose: mandatory training and open discussion on leadership, respect, and the dangers of unconscious bias. The training module, developed overnight by a team at the Naval War College, used a redacted, anonymized version of the incident as its central case study. The message was clear: the Navy would learn from Thorn's mistake. This would not be swept under the rug. It would be carved into the institution's memory as a lesson in humility, a stark reminder that the true strength of the Navy wasn't in its ships or its weapons, but in the character of its people, all of its people. The formal humbling of Marcus Thorn was a stark and solemn affair. It did not take place in a public courtroom, but in the quiet, wood-paneled office of the Fleet Admiral. Stripped of his command and facing a court-martial that would ruin him entirely, he was offered a choice: face the full legal consequences or accept a non-judicial punishment of the highest severity, resign his commission, and issue a formal, public apology to Lieutenant Commander Sharma. He chose the latter. His letter of apology was not a private affair. It was transmitted to every command in the fleet and read aloud at morning quarters by every commanding officer. It was a stilted, formal document, stripped of his usual bluster, detailing his profound failure of leadership and his deep and abiding regret for the dishonor he had brought upon his uniform and the officer he had wronged. For Sharma, the apology was an administrative footnote. She read it, signed the official form acknowledging its receipt, and filed it away. She requested no other form of restitution. She gave no interviews, offered no public comment. Her victory did not require a celebration. Her vindication was in the truth, which was now known. She returned to her duties as if nothing had happened, her routine unchanged, her demeanor as calm and professional as ever. This, more than anything, cemented her legend. Her refusal to gloat, her complete lack of vengeful satisfaction, was seen as the ultimate sign of her elite professionalism. She had not sought the confrontation, but when it came, she had met it, weathered it, and moved on. Her silence after her vindication was even more powerful than her silence during her humiliation. It spoke of a character forged in crucibles far hotter than a public dressing down. While Thorn faded into disgraced obscurity, Sharma's status within the special operations community was elevated to near mythical levels. She had always been respected for her skills. Now she was revered for her character. She became the living embodiment of the quiet professional ethos, a SEAL who had won one of her most significant victories not with a rifle, but with discipline. The story was told and retold at training commands, in team rooms in Dam Neck, and in forward operating bases in undisclosed locations. She had demonstrated that the core tenets of a special operator, unwavering calm under pressure, tactical awareness, and absolute self-control, were not just for the battlefield. They were principles for life. The most significant change, however, was cultural. Young officers, particularly women and minorities who had often felt the sting of being underestimated, now had a new role model. The story of Anya Sharma gave them a powerful example. You did not have to shout to be heard. You did not have to posture to be strong. Your competence, demonstrated through quiet, disciplined action, was the only credential that mattered. The incident had lanced a boil of prejudice, forcing a conversation that was long overdue. The Navy was a better, stronger, and more self-aware institution because of it. 2 years later, in the hallowed halls of the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, a guest lecturer stood before a packed auditorium of first-year midshipmen. The man was older now, his face a roadmap of a long and storied career, but his eyes still held the sharp, intelligent fire of command. It was retired Fleet Admiral James Callahan. He was a regular speaker at the Academy's ethics and leadership seminars, and his lectures were legendary. Today he was telling a story. Leadership, he began, his voice a low rumble that filled the cavernous room, is not about the volume of your commands. It is about the depth of your character. The loudest person in the room is often the weakest, because their noise is a desperate attempt to mask a deep-seated insecurity. True strength, the kind of strength that wins wars and earns loyalty, is quiet. It is calm. It is competent. He paced the stage slowly, letting his words sink in. I want to tell you about an incident that occurred 2 years ago. It is now a case study, known as the Sharma Protocol, on composure and the catastrophic failure of assumption. He proceeded to recount the events on the flight deck of the USS Gerald R. Ford. He did not use Thorne's name, referring to him only as the Admiral, but he spoke of Lieutenant Commander Sharma by name, holding her up as the absolute standard. He described her stillness under fire, her tactical brilliance, her profound self-control. The Admiral saw her gender, her stature, her quiet demeanor, and he saw weakness, Callahan said, his voice hardening. He made a judgment based on a shallow, ignorant assessment of her exterior. What he failed to see was the truth of her interior. He failed to see the heart of a warrior forged in the toughest training on Earth and tested in the most dangerous places on the planet. His assumption was his undoing. He explained how the Sharma Protocol was now integrated into officer training across the Navy. It was a simulation where young officers were placed under extreme psychological pressure, publicly questioned, insulted, and challenged by a superior, to test their ability to remain composed and professional. The goal was not to endure abuse, but to learn to separate the signal from the noise, to maintain mission focus in the face of personal attacks, a skill Sharma had demonstrated with breathtaking mastery. The lesson had been institutionalized, ensuring that future generations of naval leaders would never forget the folly of that day. The legacy of that single, sun-drenched afternoon was not just a training protocol or a cautionary tale. It was a fundamental shift in the Navy's understanding of strength. The image of Anya Sharma standing tall in the face of injustice, her silent competence a shield against a storm of arrogance, became an enduring symbol. A photograph, taken by a quick-thinking sailor in the crowd, had captured the moment just after the slap, with Callahan saluting her. The photo, though unofficial, was quietly framed and hung in the ready rooms of SEAL teams and the halls of the Naval Academy. It needed no caption. Everyone knew what it meant. It was a picture of a paradigm shift, the moment when the old guard's bluster was irrevocably broken by the quiet professionalism of the new. Anya Sharma, now a full commander, was eventually assigned as the head of training for all new SEAL candidates in Coronado. Her methods were revolutionary. She placed as much emphasis on psychological resilience and emotional control as she did on marksmanship and physical endurance. Her mantra was simple: the body is a weapon, but the mind is the warrior. A warrior who loses their calm has already lost the fight. She trained her operators to be thinkers first, to see every crisis as a tactical problem, and to understand that true dominance comes from control over oneself, not over others. The young men and women who passed through her demanding curriculum were not just stronger and faster. They were calmer, more disciplined, and more thoughtful. They were warriors molded in her image. The story of that day on the flight deck became a foundational myth for this new generation. It taught them that respect is not a function of rank or title. It is earned through action. It taught them that courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. And it taught them that the most powerful voice in any room is often the one that doesn't need to be raised. True legacy isn't what you say about yourself. It's what others whisper about you when you leave the room. It's the standard you set, the example you become, the quiet competence that speaks louder than any shouted order ever could. For more stories where quiet professionalism triumphs over loud arrogance, and where disciplined action defines a hero's worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.